When I lost Daniel, it felt as though someone had turned the color off in my world. The days still came, the same way the tide keeps kissing the shore even after a storm, but they came in shades of gray. Our little house at the edge of Maplewood had always been filled with music. The sound of Daniel humming while he fixed the porch steps, the kettle whistling, the soft thud of his boots by the door. Now, silence had taken up residence in every corner. I still set 2 cups on the kitchen counter every morning, one for me, one for him. It wasn't denial. It was memory, a way to pretend that love could outlast absence. It had been 3 years since the accident. 3 long winters. People said time heals everything, but no one tells you that time also teaches you how to hide your pain better. I'd learned to smile again, to talk about the weather, to attend Sunday service, to even bake pies for the neighbors' kids. But the nights were harder. That was when his voice came back to me, soft and steady. "May, don't forget to close the window. The rain's coming." I would look up from my book, half expecting to see him there, smiling that crooked smile of his. But of course, it was only the wind. Until the day it wasn't. That morning started like any other. Mist hung low over the town, wrapping the houses in sleepy fog. I decided to take a walk to the lake, the place where Daniel and I had first met, 12 years ago. He'd dropped his sketchbook in the water, and I'd fished it out with a stick, laughing. He'd said, "Guess that's one way to make a splash," and from that moment, we were inseparable. As I reached the water's edge, I saw someone standing by the dock. Tall, broad-shouldered. The way he stood, something in it tugged at my chest. He turned slightly, and my breath caught. Of course it wasn't Daniel. It couldn't be. But for a heartbeat, just one, the shape of his jaw, the way he tucked his hands in his coat pockets, it was as if the universe had painted him from Daniel's memory. I almost walked away. Almost. But then he looked up and smiled. That same half-smile that had once been mine. "Morning," he said, voice calm, familiar in a way that made my heart ache. "Morning," I managed to reply. We stood there in silence for a while, both watching the ripples dance across the water. Finally, he spoke again. "Funny thing," he said, "I come here every week. Don't know why. Feels like I'm supposed to." I felt something stir inside me, an old, forgotten warmth. "Maybe," I whispered, "you're just following a memory you don't remember." He chuckled softly, glancing at me. "That's poetic," he said. "I like that." He introduced himself, Evan. He'd recently moved into town, a carpenter working on restoring old houses. When he mentioned he lived near the forest edge, the same area Daniel once dreamed of buying, a strange chill crept through me. We talked a little more, about the town, the bakery, the lake's quiet magic. Before leaving, he said, "See you around, May." My name. I froze. I don't think I told you my name," I said. He frowned, as if realizing it too. "Oh," he murmured, "you're right. Sorry, I must have heard someone say it." But no one had. He left with a small wave, his footsteps fading into the fog, and I stood there for a long time, heart racing, wind biting my cheeks, wondering, had I just met a stranger, or something far beyond that? That night, I dreamed of Daniel. Not the usual kind of dream, not the soft, fading kind where you wake with tears and reach for air. This one was clear. He stood by the lake, wearing that same brown jacket, and said, "It's okay, May. You can open your heart again." When I woke, the scent of cedarwood lingered in the room, Daniel's cologne. And for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel alone. The next morning, Maplewood was kissed by sunlight. The kind of light that made the dew shimmer like tiny diamonds on the grass. I stood by the window, clutching my coffee mug, and thinking about him, Evan. There was something strange about the way he'd said my name. It hadn't felt random or mistaken. It had felt remembered. I told myself not to dwell on it. People say names all the time without meaning to. But a quiet part of me whispered, what if it wasn't just a coincidence? Later that day, I stopped by the farmer's market. That's when I saw him again, standing near the flower stall, holding a bunch of white lilies, Daniel's favorite flowers. He noticed me instantly. "May," he said with that same warm tone, as though he'd been expecting me. These reminded me of someone. Someone special? I asked, half smiling. He hesitated, glancing down at the flowers. I'm not sure. Maybe. I just felt drawn to them. We ended up walking together through the market. He told me about his new project, an old lakeside cabin he was restoring. As he spoke, his eyes lit up, the same way Daniel's used to when he talked about crafting something with his hands. I laughed softly. You sound just like my husband when you talk about woodwork. He smiled, curious. Your husband was a builder? Yes, I said, the words still carrying a soft ache. He passed away 3 years ago. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't mean to bring up. No, it's okay, I interrupted gently. Talking about him feels like keeping him alive in some small way. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. Then he said something that made me shiver. Maybe that's how love works. You keep building even after the foundation's gone. Daniel had said those exact words to me once, the day we moved into our first home. A few days later, Evan invited me to see his woodshop. It was tucked behind a line of pines, small and sunlit, with a smell of fresh timber filling the air. I ran my fingers along a half-finished chair on the workbench. The craftsmanship was flawless. This is beautiful, I said. You've got such a steady hand. He chuckled. Guess I've had a lot of practice. Then he looked at me strangely. It's odd though, sometimes when I work, I feel like I already know what to do. Like I've done it before, in another life maybe. My breath caught. He moved to a drawer, pulling out an old sketch. I found this in the cabin I'm restoring. Thought it was part of the house's history. When he handed it to me, my hands trembled. It was Daniel's handwriting, his signature. And the sketch, the same one he'd drawn for the house he'd always dreamed of building by the lake. Where did you find this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. In the attic, Evan said. It was tucked inside a wooden box under the beams. I thought it was strange because it had your name written on the back. I turned it over. There it was. For May, when the time is right. The room spun for a moment. My knees went weak. He looked worried. May, are you all right? I nodded, though my heart was racing. I think this belonged to someone I knew very well. We stood in silence for a long time. He didn't press further. He just watched me with that quiet kindness Daniel once had, the kind that didn't need words to comfort. When I finally looked up, I noticed a thin scar near his wrist, a small crescent-shaped mark. The same place where Daniel once burned himself fixing a fireplace. Coincidence. It had to be coincidence. But as the sunlight streamed through the woodshop window, casting golden lines across Evan's face, I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had brought him back to me. That evening, as I walked home, the scent of cedar and smoke followed me. The exact scent that used to linger when Daniel came home from work. I closed my eyes and whispered into the wind. If this is you, Daniel, give me a sign. Just then, a single white feather drifted down from the sky, landing right in my hand. I looked up. No birds in sight. And for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I smiled. The lake had always been a place of memories. But that morning, when I followed Evan's truck down the winding dirt road toward the cabin, it felt different, as if the past and present were quietly folding into each other. He hopped out first, holding the door open for me. Careful, he said, smiling. The steps are a little loose. Haven't gotten around to fixing those yet. I laughed softly. Loose steps? That sounds like every house Daniel ever built. He tilted his head, amused. Then maybe your Daniel and I would have gotten along. Something about the way he said your Daniel, not out of pity, but respect, made my chest tighten. The cabin sat right by the water, surrounded by whispering pines. It was half restored, new beams gleaming against old wood, sunlight pouring through cracked windows. Dust floated in golden streaks, like tiny memories suspended in the air. As I stepped inside, the scent hit me first. Cedar, smoke, and faintly, cinnamon. The smell of home. Evan was showing me around, explaining how he'd kept most of the structure original. But my attention drifted toward the fireplace. It looked so much like the one Daniel and I had in our first home, right down to the carved initials at the corner. M+D. I froze. Evan, I whispered, pointing. Did you carve this? He followed my gaze. No, he said slowly. It was already there when I bought the place. Thought maybe it stood for the original owners. M+D. I ran my fingers over the letters, tracing every curve. My eyes stung. Evan watched quietly, giving me space. Then he said softly, "Do you ever feel like some places remember us? Like they hold onto people who loved them once?" I nodded, unable to speak. We spent the rest of the morning there. He worked on sanding a window frame while I sat by the lake, lost in thought. Every breeze, every ripple, every birdsong seemed to carry Daniel's voice. When Evan brought me a cup of coffee, he said, "You know, I've been having these dreams lately. Strange ones. About a woman standing right where you are now." I looked up sharply. "What kind of dreams?" He shrugged, uneasy. "They feel old. Like memories that don't belong to me. I see this woman, brown hair, blue scarf, and she's smiling at me. But I never see her face clearly." My breath hitched. "I used to wear a blue scarf," I said quietly. "Daniel gave it to me for our first anniversary." He blinked, startled. "That's weirdly specific." We both laughed softly, though the air between us had grown heavy, charged with something neither of us could name. Later, as I explored the back room of the cabin, I found a small wooden chest tucked beneath a loose floorboard. It was locked, but Evan pried it open gently with a chisel. Inside were two things: a folded letter, yellowed with age, and a ring. I lifted the ring, simple silver, engraved with a word inside, eternity. My knees went weak. This was Daniel's handwriting. Evan leaned closer. "You're sure?" "I'm sure," I whispered. "He used to carve messages inside all my gifts." Hands trembling, I opened the letter. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear. "If you find this, it means the circle has begun again. Love doesn't end when we do. It changes shape, waits, and finds its way back. When the time feels right, I'll come home to you. D***. The room felt suddenly still. I looked up, and Evan's eyes were wide, filled with something between disbelief and wonder. "May," he said quietly, "I don't know what this means, but I feel like I was meant to find you." Tears welled in my eyes. "Maybe you were," I whispered. "Maybe you've always been." We stepped outside as the sun began to set. The sky was burning orange, the water shimmering like liquid gold. For a moment, I swore I saw a shadow standing by the trees, Daniel's silhouette, smiling. Then it faded, melting into the evening light. Evan reached for my hand without thinking. I didn't pull away. It felt natural, familiar, like holding a memory that had somehow become real again. And when our fingers intertwined, the wind picked up suddenly, carrying the scent of cedar and rain. Maybe, just maybe, love really did find its way home. That night, the rain came suddenly. It started as a whisper against the window, then built into a steady rhythm, as if the sky itself had something urgent to say. I sat by the hearth, the sketch of Daniel's dream house lying open on my lap. The fire crackled softly, its glow dancing over the words he'd once written for me. Love doesn't end when we do. The letter from the cabin sat beside me, heavy with questions. I had read it so many times that the paper had started to fray at the folds. Outside, thunder rolled through Maplewood. The scent of wet earth and pine filled the room, Daniel's scent. Then I heard it. Soft at first, barely audible over the rain. A man's voice. Low. Calm. May, open the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I stood, trembling. The voice had come from outside, but it wasn't Evan's. I would have known his tone anywhere by now. May, it came again, clearer this time. It's all right. I opened the door slowly. There was no one there. Only rain, glistening like silver threads under the porch light. But on the wooden railing, a white feather was stuck to the wet wood, the second one. I cupped it in my hands, whispering, Daniel, is that you? Lightning flashed across the lake, and for just a heartbeat, I saw a reflection in the water, two figures standing side by side, one of them unmistakably him. Then the light faded, and I was alone again. The next morning, Evan knocked on my door. His hair was damp from the rain, his eyes tired. I couldn't sleep, he said quietly. Kept hearing someone whispering outside. My name. Over and over. My pulse quickened. Daniel's voice. He looked startled. How did you? I took a deep breath. Because I heard it too. He sat across from me, his hands clasped tightly. May, I'm not crazy, right? I saw things last night. Faces in the rain. I could feel memories that weren't mine. I nodded slowly. You're not crazy. I think someone is trying to reach us. Later that day, the rain returned, gentler this time. Evan offered to drive me back to the cabin. He said he needed to see it again, needed answers. The road was slick and quiet, the forest washed in mist. When we reached the lake, the cabin looked different, alive somehow. The curtains fluttered though no wind passed through. Inside, everything was just as we'd left it. Except one thing. The letter was gone. In its place lay a new sheet of paper. Fresh ink. Same handwriting. Don't be afraid of what comes next. The storm is only clearing the way. D. Evan's face paled. How is that possible? I didn't answer. Instead, I placed my hand over the words. The ink was still wet. When I looked up, Evan's eyes were full of tears. May, I keep dreaming of you, he said, voice breaking. Not now, but before. Long before. We were sitting by a fire. You were reading to me. I said your name and you laughed. Tears welled in my eyes. That's real, I whispered. That's a memory. Our memory. He stared at me, as if something inside him was slowly unlocking. I don't know how I know this, he said softly, but I promised I'd find you again. The wind outside howled through the pines. The window shuddered. And deep within that sound, we both heard it, Daniel's voice, clear and strong. You did, Evan. You found her. The air in the room shimmered. For one impossible moment, I saw Daniel standing between us, smiling. His outline was light, not flesh. Love doesn't end, he said gently. It becomes what it needs to be. And then he was gone. The storm eased, the air grew still. Evan and I stood there in silence, tears mingling with rainwater that had seeped through the open door. He took my hand, trembling, real, warm. I don't know what's happening, he said, voice shaking, but I feel like I've known you all my life. I smiled through the tears. Maybe you have. That night, as the rain faded into quiet drizzle, we sat together by the fire in the cabin, the same way I once had with Daniel. For the first time in 3 years, my heart didn't feel like a grave. It felt like a garden, one that had waited patiently for spring. Maybe Daniel wasn't gone. Maybe he was simply transformed. Morning came quietly to Maplewood. The rain had left behind a world washed clean. The streets glistened, the trees dripped with silver, and the air smelled of new beginnings. I woke on the couch in the cabin, wrapped in a blanket Evan had draped over me. The fire had burned low, leaving only warm embers that pulsed like the heartbeat of the house. Evan was already up. I could hear him in the kitchen, humming softly. The tune stopped me cold. It was Daniel's song. A simple melody, no words, just a hum he used to fill the silence when he worked. A tune that never existed outside our home. I sat up slowly. Evan, I called, voice trembling. Where did you learn that? He turned, confused. What this? He hummed the line again. I don't know. It just came to me. The world tilted slightly. I pressed a hand to my chest, whispering, Daniel used to sing that when he built furniture. He froze. Daniel, he repeated softly, like testing the name on his tongue. Then, almost without thinking, he whispered, Maplewood pines, cedar finish, brass handles. My eyes widened. What did you just say? He looked as startled as I felt. I don't know. Those words just came out. I covered my mouth. That was the dresser Daniel made me for our wedding. He used to describe it exactly like that. The air grew still, heavy, charged, the same feeling as the moment before a lightning strike. Evan ran a hand through his hair, pacing. May, I don't understand what's happening to me. These memories, these flashes, they feel real. Like I'm remembering something that isn't mine. I walked to him, my heart breaking and blooming all at once. Maybe, I said softly, they are yours. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes full of fear and wonder. Do you think? Yes, I whispered. I think Daniel found his way back, through you. Later that day, we went for a walk by the lake. The water was still, glassy, reflecting the golden afternoon light. Evan picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the surface. 1, 2, 3 jumps before it sank. He laughed, and the sound filled me with warmth. Daniel had taught me to skip stones. He'd always said it was about rhythm. You have to trust the throw, May, not the stone. I looked at Evan. You've done that before, haven't you? He nodded slowly. I think so. But I can't remember when. We walked in silence for a while, and then he said something that stopped me in my tracks. Do you still keep the blue scarf? I turned to him, heart pounding. How do you know about that? He looked puzzled. I don't know. It just came to me. I can see it. You standing by the fire, wrapping it around your shoulders. I can even smell the cinnamon tea you were drinking. Tears filled my eyes. That was the night before Daniel proposed to me. He stared at me, eyes wide, hands trembling. May, what's happening to me? I stepped closer, wiping a tear from his cheek. Maybe your soul is remembering what your mind forgot. That evening, we sat again by the fire. The letter and ring lay between us, like old witnesses to a love that refused to die. Evan spoke first, voice barely above a whisper. I keep thinking about that word carved in the ring. Eternity. Do you think that's what this is? Not just love, but continuation. I nodded slowly. Maybe love isn't about holding on. Maybe it's about returning, over and over, until it learns what it came for. He reached for my hand, and I didn't hesitate. His palm was warm, his pulse steady. The world outside seemed to pause, the crackle of the fire, the sigh of the wind, the soft rhythm of two hearts trying to remember the same song. "I don't know who I am to you," he said, voice breaking. "But I know what I feel, and it's as if I've loved you for 1,000 years." Tears streamed down my cheeks. "You have," I whispered. And somehow, the world was kind enough to give us another chance. When I went home that night, I found a small package on my doorstep. No note, no name. Inside was a piece of carved wood, a heart, polished smooth, with initials etched deep into its center, M+D. It was the same heart Daniel made me long ago, the one that had burned in the fire after his accident. And on the back, faint but clear, were new initials added below the first two, M+D+E. I sank to my knees, clutching it to my chest. Rain began to fall again, soft and steady, like a blessing. That night I dreamed of Daniel. He stood by the lake, smiling, his hand resting on Evan's shoulder. "Thank you," he said, "for loving her again." When I reached for him, he touched my cheek, warm and real, and whispered, "I told you, May, love doesn't end. It just changes hands." And then he faded into light. For the next few days, Maplewood seemed to breathe differently, as if the air itself had softened. The lake shimmered brighter, the trees whispered gentler. Or maybe it was me. Maybe the world feels kinder when your heart starts to believe in miracles again. Evan and I spent most mornings at the cabin now. He said the place made him feel whole, as if the walls recognized him. He'd run his hand along the banister and murmur, "This was my favorite spot to sand." Then he'd look up at me, confused, half afraid of his own words. Each time, I'd just smile softly. "I know." One afternoon, I brought him an old photo album. It was filled with pictures of Daniel and me, our wedding, our road trips, the house we built together. Evan looked at each photo in silence. His fingers lingered on one picture, Daniel sitting by the lake, carving something into wood. He whispered, "I remember this day." My breath caught. "What did you just say?" He blinked, startled by himself. "I don't know why I said that, but I can feel it. The warmth of the sun, the smell of sawdust. You were wearing a yellow dress." I covered my mouth. "Yes," I said softly, tears filling my eyes. "I was." Evan leaned back, trembling. "May, I can't keep pretending this is just coincidence. I know things I shouldn't. I feel things I can't explain." "You don't have to explain," I whispered. "Just believe." He looked at me then, really looked, and something inside him seemed to settle, like a puzzle finally finding its missing piece. That night, we walked by the lake again. The sky was streaked with purple and gold, the air thick with the scent of pine and wet earth. He picked up another stone, skimming it across the surface. 1, 2, 3 jumps, then a perfect fourth. He smiled. "You know what you used to say, May? That every ripple is a wish coming true." I froze. "I did say that," I whispered. "On our honeymoon." He turned to me, eyes shining with tears. "How do I know that, May? How can I know that?" I stepped closer, my hands trembling as they reached for his face. "Because you are Daniel," I said. "You came back. Not the same way, not in the same body, but the same soul. The same love." He didn't speak. He just pulled me into his arms, holding me as though the years between us had never happened. I felt the warmth of his heartbeat against mine, steady, familiar, eternal. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. "I don't remember everything yet, but when I'm with you, it feels like coming home." Tears streamed down my face. Then maybe that's all that matters. Later, as the moon rose high above the lake, we sat side by side on the dock. The water glowed silver beneath us. "I used to think love ended when someone died," I said softly. "That grief was the final chapter. Evan looked out at the horizon. And now? Now, I whispered. I think love is a circle, not a line. It bends, breaks, reforms, but it always finds its way back to where it began. He smiled faintly. From ashes to eternity. The words fell between us like a prayer, the title of the story we didn't know we were living. The next morning, something extraordinary happened. We found a message carved into the cabin's doorframe overnight. The wood was freshly marked, the scent of pine still sharp. It read, "The bridge is complete. Live fully, love freely. D." Evan traced the letters with his fingers, eyes glistening. "I didn't carve this," he whispered. "I know," I said. "He did." And for the first time, Evan didn't look afraid. He just nodded, as if finally understanding that love doesn't need logic, it only needs faith. That evening, we lit a lantern and placed it on the lake, watching it drift away slowly, carrying all our old pain with it. As it floated, the wind picked up, and in the faint rustle of the trees, I could almost hear Daniel's laughter, not haunting, not sad, but free. Evan squeezed my hand. "Do you hear it too?" I smiled through my tears. "Yes. He's happy." The lantern disappeared into the horizon, and with it, something inside me healed. The grief that had once been my shadow finally stepped into the light. That night, before I fell asleep, I whispered into the darkness, "Thank you, Daniel, for finding me again." And somewhere between waking and dreaming, I heard his voice one last time, soft, steady, full of love. "Always, May, until the stars forget to shine." The next few weeks passed in quiet wonder. Evan and I fell into a rhythm that felt older than time. Coffee on the porch, slow walks through the pines, evenings by the lake watching the sky change colors. But there were moments, small, fragile moments, when the air would grow heavy, and I could see something stirring behind his eyes. A flicker. A memory. A storm waiting for its name. One afternoon, we were sorting through Daniel's old journals in the cabin attic. Dust swirled around us like ghosts of thoughts unspoken. Evan reached for one of the older books, the one bound in worn brown leather. When he opened it, his hands froze. Inside, on the first page, was a letter, folded neatly, written in Daniel's strong, slanted handwriting. He looked at me. "Should I read it?" I nodded, heart pounding. He unfolded the paper slowly. His voice trembled as he read. "If you ever find this, it means you came back. Maybe not in the same way, maybe not in the same body. But I know our love is too strong to stay gone. Find me, May. Find me, and I'll remember. Daniel." The letter slipped from his hands. His breathing quickened. "May," he whispered, "I wrote this." Tears filled my eyes. "Yes, you did." He pressed his palms against his temples. "I remember, I was carving the porch railing. You were humming that old song, the one you always sang when you were nervous." I couldn't speak. My throat ached with joy and disbelief. He continued, voice breaking. "You came outside with lemonade. You laughed and said, 'You'll never finish that railing if you keep staring at me like that.'" He looked at me, eyes wide, full of recognition. "You were wearing the yellow dress again." I gasped. "Daniel," he whispered, "I remember everything." We sat there in silence as the truth settled between us. The attic felt too small to hold what was happening. The rush of emotions, the flood of memories, the impossible made real. Evan, no, Daniel, took my hand gently. "I don't understand how. But when I look at you, it's like the years in between never existed. Like the fire, the pain, the goodbye, they were just shadows. And this," he whispered, pressing my hand to his heart, "this is what's real." I broke down then, not from sorrow, but from release. 4 years, I had mourned him. 4 years, I had whispered to the stars, asking if love truly died. And now, here he was, breathing, trembling, remembering. "Why me?" he asked softly. "Why was I given this second chance?" I smiled through my tears. "Because you promised me you'd find me, and love always keeps its promises." That night, we sat by the fire. He held the old journal in his lap, tracing Daniel's handwriting, his own handwriting, as if touching proof of something sacred. "I feel like two people," he confessed. "Evan, who has lived a whole other life, and Daniel, who loved you first." I leaned closer. "You don't have to choose. Maybe love doesn't erase what came before. Maybe it just adds to it." He smiled faintly. "So you love both of me?" I laughed softly, wiping a tear. "I think I've always loved your soul. The rest is just details." Days turned into weeks again. Maplewood began to bloom with summer's golden warmth, and for the first time in years, I felt alive, truly alive. People in town noticed the change. "May, you look radiant lately," Mrs. Holbrook said at the bakery one morning. I just smiled. Maybe the heart remembers what happiness feels like. Evan and I rebuilt the cabin porch together, the same one he'd started as Daniel years ago. This time, we carved something new into the railing. To love is to return, in every lifetime. But one evening, as the sun dipped low, I found him standing by the lake, staring out with that faraway look again. "Evan?" I asked. He didn't answer at first. Then, softly, "Sometimes I still wonder if I'm supposed to stay. Maybe I was sent back just to give you peace." My chest tightened. "Don't say that." He turned to me, eyes wet. "If this is my last lifetime, May, I want to spend it right here, with you. But if I fade again someday, promise me you'll keep living." I took his face in my hands. "No more goodbyes. Not this time." He smiled, that same gentle curve of lips I'd known so long ago. "Then let's promise to live, until love itself tells us it's time." That night, as we fell asleep in the quiet hum of crickets and wind, I realized something profound. Love doesn't come back to fix what was broken. It comes back to remind us that nothing was ever truly lost. And in that moment, with his heartbeat steady beside mine, I knew that even if the universe turned to ashes again, we'd find each other once more. Because some souls are born from eternity itself. The night the fire came again, it didn't start with thunder. It started with silence. The kind of silence that makes the world hold its breath. The summer had been dry. The air was heavy, and the trees stood still as if waiting for something. Evan and I were inside the cabin, finishing dinner when the first spark appeared, a faint glow outside the window. He stood up, brow furrowed. "May, do you smell that?" Before I could answer, we heard the crackle, low, hungry, rising. The woods were burning. For a second, fear rushed through me, sharp and familiar. The last time fire had come to my world, it had taken Daniel. Not again. Not this time. I grabbed the old photo album, the journals, the carved railing piece, the things that held our history. Evan ran to the back door, shouting, "We can stop it before it spreads." But when we stepped outside, we saw the flames dancing across the tree line, too fast, too wild. The lake reflected the fire like 1,000 broken stars. He turned to me, eyes fierce. "May, go to the lake. Now." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm not losing you again. May." I grabbed his hand, holding it tight. "Last time, you walked into the fire alone. This time, we walk through it together." For a moment he stared at me, then nodded. We ran toward the lake, smoke swirling around us. The heat pressed close, searing the air, but we didn't let go of each other's hands. Every step felt like defiance, against death, against loss, against fate itself. When we reached the water's edge, he turned back one last time, looking at the burning cabin, our past in flames. he whispered. Funny, isn't it? Fire took me away once, and now it's setting me free. I looked at him, tears streaming down my face. What do you mean? He smiled, that calm, knowing smile that Daniel used to wear when he understood something before I did. May, he said softly, this was never about me coming back. It was about you learning to live again. I shook my head, sobbing. Please, don't say goodbye. He cupped my face, thumbs wiping my tears. No goodbyes, just light. And then, as the flames reached the cabin, a burst of golden wind swept across the lake. The fire didn't rage, it shimmered. It was like watching the sun breathe. In that glow, I saw him. Not Evan, not Daniel, but both. Whole. Luminous. His outline glowed brighter, almost transparent. May, his voice echoed, gentle and infinite, you were never meant to stay in the ashes. You were meant to rise. I reached out for him, crying, please don't leave me again. He smiled, eyes filled with peace. I'm not leaving. I'm becoming. And then, the light enveloped him, merging with the fire, the water, the sky. For a moment, the world was silent again. Then the flames softened, turning to ash, then mist, then nothing. All that remained was the lake, calm, golden, endless. When morning came, the cabin was gone. But the land was alive, green shoots already rising from the scorched ground. Life, beginning again. I sat by the lake, holding the charred piece of railing in my lap. The words we'd carved were still there. To love is to return, in every lifetime. A breeze passed through, warm and gentle, carrying a voice only I could hear. You kept your promise, May. You lived. I closed my eyes and whispered back. And I'll keep living, my love, until the stars forget to shine. Years later, people in Maplewood still tell stories about that summer. The fire that should have destroyed everything but somehow didn't. They say the flames burned bright but left no harm near the lake. Some call it a miracle. I just smile. Because I know better. Love didn't end that night. It transformed. Now, when I walk by the lake at dusk, I see the reflection of two figures instead of one, mine and his, shimmering beside me in the golden light. And I know, in every breath, in every ripple, in every sunrise, that love never truly dies. It only changes form. It only waits for the next lifetime.